tonight. I'm actually very honored to be around three of my most admired women, starting with Datin Paduka Marina Mahathir, Trina Liang from UN Women, and Azra. Maybe before we start this panel discussion, I'd like to share a little bit about One Singapore. Most of you might be familiar with most of the programs that we do, as well as I see some familiar faces that most of you are here in our previous panel discussion. One Singapore does two things, which is one, to raise awareness on poverty, and the other one is to take concrete actions. And over the years, we have actually donated quite a substantial amount of money as well as food for our beneficiaries. One of those is Willing Hearts. In the last donation food drive with Class 95, we have actually gotten about more than $20,000 worth of food, like rice, oil, and all that. Thank you to all the generous Singaporeans who have donated kindly. And these will actually go to Soup Kitchen, where we will feed 3,000 poor families in Singapore. So Willing Hearts cook for them on a daily basis. So even our exco at One Singapore, sometimes will immerse ourselves in the process of actually packing the food and sending them to the poor families in Singapore. We have also donated, I think last about $10,000 to Home, which is for the human trafficking victims, and also about $70,000 to the Cover Project for the transient workers. Tonight's event, the subject of the discussion is Stop the Violence, Ending Poverty and Violence Against Women. And I think this is a very important subject because not just in the recent Delhi rape case that we have heard of how women suffered through such an ordeal, but also I think those women who have actually suffered in silence. There are many different types of violence against women, not just rape, but other issues to be considered, including marital rape, which most countries are actually discussing at the moment. And if you have actually gone to our website, you will realize that as many as 7 in 10 women will be abused, beaten, mutilated, or raped in their lifetimes. And poverty actually breeds gender violence, and gender violence leads to poverty, but neither is inevitable. So today we're going to have these women who will be sharing their experience with us. And the first speaker is Ms. Trina Liang. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She's the Managing Director at Temple Bridge Investments and President of UN Women National Committee Singapore. Under her watch at UN Women and together with her team, 2 important significant advocacy milestones were reached with the Singapore government in 2012. First, a mandatory rest day for foreign domestic workers and a national plan of action against trafficking in persons, which has been set up where UN Women leads the interagency task force guiding Singapore's response to TIP from 2012 to 2015. Now, each of the speakers will be given 10 minutes to actually speak, and followed by, we're going to allocate more time for the question and answers because we'd like to hear from you as well. So without further ado, let me get Trina to start the ball rolling.
Good evening, everybody. I mean, it's amazing to me to see so many people on a Friday evening here to discuss such a serious topic. I think it's a very timely topic that One Singapore has brought to our attention today. In particular, as you heard what Hani was saying, the horrific rape case in Delhi was certainly a reminder that violence against women is not something that happens sporadically. It happens quite a lot, and we were reminded of that. And also in October last year, if you remember, there was a 15-year-old girl in Afghanistan who was shot in the head. And if you see the reports today or yesterday, that she is now again in school, but she was shot in the head by the Taliban because she wanted to be educated. That together with what you've probably been reading and hearing and watching on female infanticide or feticide, that's primarily in China and India, where you see human fetuses. Fetuses where they see it's a girl and they get rid of it in illegal shops in China or India, for example. In fact, UN Women just showed a movie on it. It's called It's a Girl, if you're interested. And also in Africa, one of the biggest issues we have at UN Women is genital mutilation. Again, a very female form of violence. Now, if you look at all these countries, these are developing countries, and clearly, if the question today is there's a correlation between poverty and violence against women, I think just from that cross-section alone, one could easily say yes, indeed, in the poorest countries, there is a correlation. But I think in UN Women, and if we look at it less from a simplistic angle, violence against women is a very wide topic. It's universal. It cuts across race, culture, religion, and class. Yeah, and I think that because it's so wide and throughout so many spheres of society, it's important to realize that violence against women is also quite wide, in the sense that it can be rape, it can be physical abuse, it can be, as I said, the infanticide and female feticide. It can be an abusive personal relationship, an intimate relationship that you have with your husband. And I think certainly, when it comes to money, it is a stress when families do not have as much, that it adds another dimension where violence will take place. In Singapore, I want to just add that at UN Women, when we look at violence against women in Singapore, we're primarily looking at sex trafficking. A lot of what we do, we work with home as well. And we have written reports. We lead the sex trafficking in persons report. And this is what I think we in Singapore are doing. Around UN Women globally, we are involved in violence against women where there's rape, abuse, and frankly, the whole gamut of violence. Now, in the UN, empirically, when we define violence against women, it is very wide, like I said. And one of the things that we have issues in is actually how do you statistically say that one country has more violence as opposed to another country. So for example, if we come back to the topic, which is the correlation between violence and poverty, are the poorest countries, so as defined by GDP per capita, really also exhibiting higher violence against women tendencies? And I think this is a struggle that we have at the UN, where even up to today, either some countries do not have the data, some countries are unwilling to provide the data, and also I think there isn't a universal compliance of what standards of measurements there are. So again, coming back to the topic, it's somewhat difficult to define when your statistical methods across countries are not uniform. At the UN, violence against women is enshrined in CEDAW. I think most of you know CEDAW, the Convention Against the Elimination of Violence Against Women, all forms of discrimination against women. And we use that as a platform. All the countries, well, not all the countries, but Singapore at least has signed it in 2005, and most countries accede to that. And also our campaign at the UN is called Unite, which is the violence against women, uniting all the countries against it. I would like to just end here to leave you with one thought, that violence is sometimes embedded in culture, possibly sometimes in religion as well, and where generations of power relationships have over time been embedded in society, such that at times it's very difficult for women to even see beyond these generations, like hundreds of years of oppression. Yeah? And I think with the advent of modern age, you see more women getting educated and realizing their rights, their legal rights as well. And I have a lot of hope for the future because of that. So I'll leave you with that thought. I hope I've thrown it open so that it's as wide a topic for the Q&A later.
Thank you, Trina. That's a lovely start, and I think what Trina shared with us is really important. And I do concur with her that sometimes it is really about countries not participating in actually giving the statistics or the report, which makes it very difficult. And also, like, maybe some women are not empowered enough to actually speak up against such heinous crime. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, Ms. Azra Rahayu Ahmad Effandi. She's currently a team leader, clinical supervision with the Malay Youth Literary Association, where she leads the casework and counselling unit. She's a registered social service practitioner with Singapore Social Work Association and has been working in the social service for 16 years. She received her tertiary education in psychology and currently pursuing a master's in contemporary therapeutic counselling from University of Hertfordshire in UK. In her 16 years of service, Azra Rahayu has worked with prisoners and their families, as well as victims of domestic violence and juvenile delinquents. She managed the Star Shelter for 3 years, where she successfully helped and empowered the victims to be self-reliant. Azra?
Yeah. Okay. So domestic violence in the Singapore context, domestic violence is family violence, meaning abusive behavior towards family members, spouse, children, parents, brothers and sisters. Yeah, and victims could be suffering in terms of emotional, psychological, physical, sexual, or they can even be confined by their partner, their loved ones. It's typically a dominate and control situation where one needs to put another in his or her thumb. Okay, and domestic violence, like Trina shared, it cut across all economic status, all gender. Not happens to women only, but it happens to men also. Though we see studies have shown that most of the victims are women. Yeah. So in my work, I've seen women who are highly educated, as well as those who are lower in socio-economic status. So to me, in my experience, those who are more educated, they are more, they find it, I see that they are moving on faster. Yeah, moving on faster because they are able to find jobs easier, and then they gain their own financial independence. Then with the financial means, they could rent rooms outside and then just pass the time while waiting for their divorce, and then eventually they get rid or they get out of the marriage. Yeah. Whereas those who are lower in education, they find it tougher to find jobs which earn enough for them to support their children, support themselves, and to rent a flat, or to even rent a room. Yeah, renting a room in Singapore in a HDB master bedroom, renting a room costs about $700. And imagine like being a woman with kids renting a room. You know, most homeowners, they don't want it. They prefer not to have children in their homes. So that's another challenge. So when we see the process, when we see sometimes we don't understand why women stick to, why women prefer, or these victims prefer to stay in the marriage. But it's a very, very long process. It's a hard process, especially if you are coming from the lower economic. Yeah, it's a very long and tough process. So eventually, this woman would then, unfortunately, they would choose to go back to their husband, to their matrimonial home, where because they are still financially dependent on their husband. Yeah. And most of these women who come under the lower economic status, I also observe that they don't they don't go to their family members when they need help. Why? There are for various reasons, yeah. One of the reason is cultural, our Asian context. When they speak to their mothers, when they speak to their parents about violence happening to them, mothers would say, be patient. This is marriage, you know. This is part of and parcel of marriage, so you have to be patient. And then I think there's a Chinese saying also, a fate of a woman, something like that. Yeah. So you have to go with the flow. And then in some ways, it's face value. You know, if you leave your husband, if you get divorced, you're not a good woman, or you know, you're bringing shame to the family. Yeah. And then there are also there are also parents who who already foresee that this is coming. You see, because this is already happening while their children, their daughters, are dating. So these victims, they don't want to go back to the family, because you know, going back to the parents means parents would then nag at them again and you know, remind them, you see, I told you not to marry this guy and blah blah blah. Okay, so because they're very they are unwilling to share, or they have very limited people who they can share to, you know, they eventually become helpless. Yeah, so when they become helpless, then come the depression and the PTSD and all, and you know, that makes them more difficult to move on. Yeah, and so like I said just now, they would then eventually go back to their husband. Yeah. Okay, I think I will share during the question and answers.
Thank you, Azra. Yeah, I think what Azra said, you know, brings me to this point of if the woman is not actually earning, you know, it's not working, and maybe she has like 2-3 kids to take care of, and you know, maybe to hire a domestic helper could be too expensive. She just have to, like, you know, subject herself to like being abused, not just physically, but sometimes it could be emotional abuse that could actually cause traumas as well. Okay, we're going to move on to our final speaker. Marina Mahathir is a writer, women's rights and HIV/AIDS activist, and TV producer. She served as president of the Malaysian AIDS Council for 12 years, and currently she's a member of the Board of Sisters in Islam, which advocates for justice and equality for Muslim women. Marina also writes in a fortnightly column on social issues in a local English language daily as well as online, and writes and speaks regularly on women's issues. She's also an avid blogger, Twitterer, and Facebooker, so you can choose to follow her. Okay, and she has authored 2 compilations of her newspaper columns in liberal doses and Telling It Straight, as well as 50 Days of Rantings by MM. In 2010, Marina was named the UN Person of the Year by the United Nations in Malaysia.
Thank you, Anu. Do excuse me, I have a kind of a cold, so my voice is not coming out so much, but I'll try. First of all, let me thank Hani and One Singapore for inviting me here to speak at this session. Actually, when I first saw One Singapore, I was a bit concerned whether it was related to One Malaysia. One Malaysia, if you follow Malaysian politics, is kind of the government slogan, which supposedly is supposed to unite us all, but it doesn't quite work. So, but I'm glad it's not. When I looked at this topic of violence and poverty, I was a little bit concerned, because I thought, you know, why are we linking violence against women with poverty? Because I think it makes a very uncomfortable association, because it seems to suggest that if you're poor, you're more likely to be abusive or to be violent. And as both my co-panelists have mentioned, in fact, this is not true. That violence does not rely on poverty, and neither does poverty make it more likely for people to be violent. There are other reasons why this happens, and certainly, the well-off and the wealthy are not immune from abuse. There might be different types of abuse. They may be better at covering it up, but they are just as capable. And as Azra said, domestic violence covers not just the wife, but also children, parents, siblings, and also domestic workers. And we certainly have a lot of abuse of domestic workers in Malaysia, and certainly it's not poor people who are employing domestic workers. So it really, where does it all stem from? It stems from an idea of superiority over people who you regard as lesser than you, as unequal than you. It comes from gender inequality for the most part. So this is one way of showing dominance. And to my mind, really, the level of equality in any country, between men and women particularly, needs to be measured by the level of violence against women particularly. The higher the level of violence, the higher the inequality there is. And there's no country that is immune. There's violence all over the world. It might come in different forms, but it's there. And I think we would be really deluding ourselves if we think we're well off and it doesn't happen, or it might only happen to women of other nationalities within our shores, but not our own people. I think just really looking at proper data and everything, you'll find it happens. There are, as Trina said also, there are many forms of violence, and it really, there are different forms. I mean, rape is one. In Malaysia last year we had over 3,000 cases of rape. 3,000 cases of domestic violence and almost 3,000 cases of rape. Plus there's incest, there's violence against domestic workers, statutory rape with people who are under the age of consent, and sexual harassment. And in addition, we have female circumcision in Malaysia, which we, as women's groups, classify also as violence against women. And we've just done a little study of female circumcision in Malaysia, and it is surprisingly high, only among Muslim community, but almost all women go through it. It's not anywhere the same as what happens in Africa, but there is an incision being done, and that's female circumcision. And that's one, and child marriage is still an issue for us. Marriage of children under the age of 16, mostly girls. So all of this we classify under violence. And going back again to why it happens, inequality, where does this idea of inequality come from? It comes from many things, and I think they've mentioned it, culture, tradition, and sometimes religion. My organization, Sisters in Islam, we started off as an organization over 20 years ago working on domestic violence, working on violence against women. At the time, this was in the 80s, there was a bill that was going through Parliament that would criminalize domestic violence. All the women's groups were involved in this because there was growing concern that there were so many women who were being abused by their husbands, some very violently abused, some even killed, but the police would take no action because this was considered a domestic issue and therefore not their business. So it was very important to find a way to bring the law into this, to protect women. And so we pushed for a Domestic Violence Act through Parliament. It took 6 years. 6 years of lobbying. Why? Because there was so many people, particularly men, the male MPs, were objecting to it. And one of the reasons they were objecting to it, particularly from the Muslim MPs, was that apparently it's there in the Quran that a man can beat his wife. It's in 434, if anybody wants to look up. And this was very disturbing, of course, for a lot of women. You know what? There is, divine sanction for this. It cannot be. So Sisters in Islam started because we had to ask the question, if God is just, how can he allow such injustice to happen? He created men and women, why should he favor one over the other? And so that's how we went back to the text, the holy text, to see whether this was true. And yes, it is there, but the interpretations of the text varied widely, and if we looked at the whole paragraph, or the whole verse, it wasn't about divorcing, it wasn't about beating women, it was really about how to settle disputes. And in fact had many levels of how to do it, from negotiation and talking, and this was very last resort, very last resort. Even then there are interpretations that say that the word used there, which is often interpreted as beat, in fact didn't mean that. It meant to leave. I mean, so you're totally fed up, you just go away. And so many other interpretations. So we use that knowledge, the fact that there are so many interpretations, why do you pick the worst one to use in our lobbying? And a lot of it, we did memoranda after memoranda, all sorts of papers on this, bringing a lot of experts. And we finally got, in 1994, we got the law passed through Parliament. Even then, it was not gazetted for another 2 years, because there were still people objecting to it. Outside of Parliament, you'd think Parliament is the highest lawmaking body, and that would be it, but no. There were still people objecting. It took another 2 years for it to be passed. So, these are the types of justifications for inequalities, for injustices that people use really to really concretize in many ways the male domination in our societies, and it still exists today. Just last week, last 2 weeks, the negotiations at the Commission on the Status of Women in New York, which was a document about sexual reproductive health, violent opposition from a lot of conservative countries, an unholy coalition, Muslim countries, Catholic countries, the Vatican, objecting to language about violence against women, objecting to language about sexual reproductive health. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt brought out a statement saying we should reject CEDAW altogether. We should reject this document altogether. I mean, this is very alarming for many women. Luckily, a lot of lobbying and a lot of sensible women were there in New York. The final document is not bad. And it's not bad. What's significant is that the head of the Egyptian delegation defied her bosses, the Muslim Brotherhood, defied them to pass the language, which basically says you cannot use culture, tradition, religion, whatever, as excuse for injustice against women, especially about violence against women. You cannot use that. And so this was quite a victory and a real relief to many of us, because if they allowed that, then we would be back in square one. So I think we have to look at the roots of this violence and do a lot of work, to really understand what underlays this. and then push for our advocacy based on that. Because, like I said, it doesn't matter if there is this idea that men are justified in doing this. It wouldn't matter whether they were poor or rich or whatever. I mean, in all our studies, we found there's so many different excuses they give. The poorer ones might give, oh, pressure, you know, economic pressure, whatever. The richer ones have other reasons. They want to marry another one, for instance, and the first wife won't allow. B. You know, there are all sorts of reasons. So the fact that they think that that's a way to solve an issue is what we need to get at. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Marina. It's so fascinating to hear Marina speaks because we get to actually also learn a little bit about the issues in Malaysia, and I think what she said is so true because what I think in one of the verse in the Quran, in this verse called the walls, it actually says that God created different gender and tribes because He wants us to get to know one another, and the best amongst us are the righteous. He didn't say the best amongst us are the male or this particular religion or this particular race. But I think some of these ulamas or religious leaders tend to take some of the verses out of context, and the problem is when there is no proper research and scrutiny, right, from others, it becomes like just a norm. Like they attend some of these mosques, and the example I just heard this Malaysian ustaz, it was done on a radio station, and it actually says that if the man comes home and he's like tired, the role of the wife is actually to open up her skirt, and if the man wants sex, she should get it, and to
When
hold the
he's
cane.
tired.
Yeah, like and hold the
Wouldn't that
cane.
make him more tired?
Yeah, or to hold the cane, for example. So if he's angry, he will beat her up. So I think this sort of like rhetoric is really unnecessary, and it happens. I've heard it like in Malaysia, in Indonesia, So I think these are some of the things which I think Sisters in Islam has done an amazing job to actually help some of these women. So without further ado, I'm going to open to the floor if you have any burning desires to ask a question or to just share perhaps from your experiences or people that's around you. Please introduce yourself first and probably where you come from. Can I take from Fuhai? Okay.
Can I start? My name is Tan.
Over time. And usually it changes because people see that it's unjust to any particular group, then you have to change it. As an example, in Victorian times, in England, in Victorian times, married women couldn't hold on to their property. They got married, then that whatever property they had goes to the husband. This is the basis of Downton Abbey. If you all follow Downton Abbey, the whole thing is about marrying someone rich. But that has changed. That is obviously not the case today. And in many cases, things like dowry or whatever, it changes. People hold on to the people who hold on to these cultures are usually because they're getting something out of it, and because generally we live in very patriarchal societies, so they are keen to keep all of this. I mean, look, and it's not even uniform across the board. When people try and say this type of culture actually comes from religion, it's not true. Why is it that you look across the whole spectrum of Muslim countries and they're all different? Saudi Arabia women can't drive cars. Why? You can't use religion to justify that because there's so many other Muslim countries where they do. It's obviously a way of controlling women so that they can't be out there. And that's the whole thinking. And there isn't any reason why you can't change it because it's humanly constructed, it's socially constructed. So, I think that's something that we have to bear in mind. And not all Eastern societies are patriarchal in that way, and that follow ni. In Minangkabau society, it's matrilineal. It's completely matrilineal. It's the women who dominate. Property goes through women, and it's the men have a very secondary role, and that's a very traditional Malay type society.
That's why the men go on Merantau and don't come back. They marry outside the community afterwards.
Yeah, but other men like to marry in, right? Because they get it. But actually, it's the Kelantanis who like to merantau.
No, the Minangkabau.
Oh, yeah.
They like to
Okay.
merantau and they don't come back because they said the mom's done.
Oh, well, but these societies exist. There are different types of socially constructed traditions.
With regards to adat property, you mentioned.
And one of the worrying tendencies in Malaysia was that before it used to be personal property that gets divided by faraid. Your father dies, your mother dies, and then that gets divided. Where daughters get half of sons. Nowadays they're extending it to even more things. For instance, insurance. Husbands take out insurance to ensure that their wives are okay after they pass on. But now we're finding that the state religious department wants to put faraid onto insurance, which means the wife is not going to get the whole stuff, which was the intention of the husband. EPF is being subjected to faraid, which is crazy, So, we have a big fight to do this. So things like the Bapakte way of distributing property is going to die out if these types of laws become dominant. But like customary like that, yeah, you can see it very clearly if you go to a wedding ceremony in Negeri Sembilan, it's all women.
Thank you. And Christiana?
UN Women, clearly, well, definitely one of the how do you say? We do encourage that men support what we do, and we actively engage men to support our activities, and that ranges from violence and sex trafficking to even the Day Off campaign. So in almost everything we do, we do see men and the education of boys as well as a very important part of the fight against violence against women.
Yeah, I think we have to keep, I think it's an honor that we have a lot of men today, and it shows that, men are supporting us. Yeah. So in our work with clients, we also see the importance of working with the husbands. Yeah. It's not just about helping the women move on with their lives, but we also have to get their husbands fixed. So firstly, the husbands have to be forthcoming. If they really love their marriage, in most situations they would say yes, they love their wife. That's why they beat out their wives. So we tell them to go for group therapy. These perpetrators, sadly, they also have experienced violence in their early childhood. You see, most of them. So we do have an organization. PAVE is one organization who is working. PAVE. They are working closely with men in recovery. And
I think it's really quite. Sorry, still. Oh, I was going to respond to her. She was asking all three of us.
Yes.
Is that all right?
Sorry.
We think at Sisters, we really think that men should be allies, as much as possible. It's not easy because as an organization, the things we're saying is quite challenging for a lot of Malaysian society, not just the men but also the women, because we are challenging accepted dogma, really accepted interpretation of religion. But we're working on our basis is justice and equality, which we believe the religion does promote. So we are working through the religion rather than apart from it, which we think is very important. And in that, we also find that it's really important to have men as allies. It's very much a strategy of ours to bring in. And we have been looking, I mean, there's not a lot of them, but really among the religious establishment, we have found some really good allies. Currently, we're working, like the Mufti of Perlis is the head of religion in Perlis. Has been very good, very outspoken. The Chief Justice of the Sharia Court in Terengganu is also a great ally. We work on them on certain issues. For instance, about illegitimate children and things like that. And it's once we have them on board, it's kind of hard for people to say to us, oh, you can't talk about religion because you're female, you can't talk about religion because you don't cover your heads, you can't talk about religion because you didn't go to Al-Azhar. And all these people did. And they're guys, you know. So as a strategy, it's really very important for us. We're also finding that among younger men, we have a lot of fans. It's really quite interesting. We have a lot of fans among male students and male, in their 20s or whatever. We go and give a lot of talks to university, even Islamic university, which is a very conservative institution. We get all these male students coming up to us. And why is it when we ask them, why are they so supportive of us? Very often, they are the children of polygamy. They have seen their mothers suffer. And so they know that our work is going to help women like their mothers. And that's why it is. So it is a strategy that we really need to use.
Fook Hai, I think your point about educating men, and Mrs. Tan, your point about the education of young men when they are still in school is excellent. And UN Women, PNI, and our team actively go to all the schools in Singapore to do that. But as Marina said, and a lot of you have said, and yourself as well, social constructs are very difficult to change. Very difficult. What Marina is doing, what we are doing at UN Women, where we're changing social constructs where there was not a day off for domestic workers, where sex trafficking was not something that was taken very seriously in Singapore. Advocacy is something that we try very hard, as you're saying. It is our time. It is our time to make the changes. I want to share with you that I think in the workplace things are moving, and you don't see it perhaps as much or as fast in society, but I feel like in my 20 years working, that I can see a lot of change. And I'll give you an example. When I started work, I worked in a bank called a dealing room. And a dealing room is a place where, if any of you trade the markets, it's where the trades get done, or bond markets. It's a very fast-moving place. And 90% of the people in the dealing room, if not 95, are men. And I remember a time when I had to go in, and the girls had to go in. We started in our early 20s, and we'd hear a lot of language that the men used to use. And you are very uncomfortable because you're not used to it. You're a young graduate, and and I think some young men who started out with me, there were a class of 5 new kids that came in, and I think it's exactly what you said, Fook Hai. They felt a need to start speaking like this, and Yes.
Just want to add something.
Yeah.
This actually still goes on today in the trading floors in quite a few investment banks.
Yes, this is
We
true.
have a bunch of male traders. What they do is
Yeah.
they'll pick a young, pretty girl as an intern, and they'll ask her to wear a tight fitting top and sit on top of the table while they play poker. And
It
their job
didn't
is to
happen.
feel out the tricks. It's still going on to this day.
It is a very, it's one of the toughest environments for women to work in a developed country, I think. But having said that, I actually see that because of what's been happening the last 5 to 10 years, that you have CSR programs that encourage banks and companies to look at women's rights, women's respecting women, giving women maternity leave, flexi time, and I think slowly but surely, and I'm not saying that it will change in this generation, but I can see some improvement. So in that sense, I have hope. I have hope because there are things moving, there are people here that are trying to make changes, and yeah, I like to say that at least I feel that there's hope in the future. Yes. Thank you.
I don't really understand.
I think as much as educating children in school is crucial, is very important, educating our children from home is just as much important. Yeah. So it is very, as parents, or if you're going to be parents, it's very important to teach your children self-value and respecting one another, because I really believe that education starts from home. Yeah. And one point which I feel I need to highlight is violence, or domestic violence, is everybody's business. Yeah. So it is very common, even in Singapore, when people know that their neighbors get beaten, or the neighbors' children get beaten, they just shut up their mouth because they believe it's people's business, I shouldn't interfere. That's a very wrong mindset which we have to change. Yeah, we have to be a little bit capable. We have to be a little bit busybody. Yeah, to save someone. I have my clients who have passed away and all that due to violence. Yeah, so we don't only provide them with options, and then if they refuse to listen, we shun away from them. No, it is a very long process. The recovery process is a very, very long one. So do not give up on your family or friends who are abused, or who has been whining or speaking to you. Don't give up on them. And if I also wish to see that we need a lot of jobs for these women. We need to understand that they need to take time off to attend to court hearings and all that. So this is I think not many companies that understanding. Yeah. So usually when companies, what I experience is when companies knows that this lady is they have court orders to go and all that. Oh, it cuts down productivity, so I don't think you should be working here. That's reality. So I think more and more companies should understand the ladies. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Azra. And Marina?
I just wanted to address that thing about the gender stereotypes and where men are concerned, because gender again is another social construct. How men are supposed to behave, how women are supposed to behave, is something that society somehow decides. And again, it's human construct and it can be changed. And I agree very much that men are, while we address stereotypes about women, we also need to address stereotypes about men, because they are just as oppressed by it. And one of the issues is, how men themselves perpetuate it because they are afraid to get out of it. And peer pressure is a very big problem. And I can tell a story about how when I was working in HIV, I saw one of the sort of problem pages in the newspapers. And it came from a teenage boy who wrote in to say, my friends are pressuring me to go to a sex worker. And I really don't want to. but I don't know how to say no to them. And this is a very real problem in these modern times, that how do we support a boy like that who wants to be his own person, who doesn't want to succumb to this peer pressure because he just doesn't want to, but also because today it's dangerous. It's actually dangerous. So these sorts of things, we have nothing for boys like this, because we're constantly reinforcing the type of stereotype that boys are supposed to be. They're supposed to be sexually experienced. They're supposed to know things. They're supposed to take risks and all that. How do you protect them from that? When I was producing a TV program called 3R, the host would also do workshops in schools, in workplaces. And one of the interesting workshops we did was in a Ford Motor Company, actually, because the boss there was a woman, and she got very embarrassed one time. She took guests around the factory floor, female guests, and there were all these catcalls and whistles, and she was so appalled by this. She called our team in 3R to do a workshop with the factory workers. And what we did basically was we put the men in the shoes of women. And basically made them understand what it's like to be harassed. Basically, we took the most macho one of them and made him walk through a lineup of women. First round, we told the women, don't touch him at all. Just stand there, don't touch him. And he walked like this. And the second round, we said to the women, now you can do what you want. And he walked like this. So we said, why did you walk like this the second time round? I said, because I was afraid. And ding, light bulb went up. And really, I think that men are sometimes caught up in this stereotypes of how they sort of behave. They don't realize what it feels like for the other side. So one of the strategies I think we should do is to put them in women's shoes. Not literally in high heels, but to understand the situation. But meanwhile, I think in violence, I think, violence and poverty is not a violence equals poverty or poverty equals violence. It's not that all the time. For example, you might have read a report about the violence against women in the US military. How women in the US military have been raped, abused, everything. Incredible levels of violence. And perhaps that's partly because of, male dominance, but also perhaps a culture of violence in some situations. And the military is very vulnerable to doing this. I mean, you see armies, militias using rape as a weapon of war, right? It's not because they have extra hormones. It's just because that's a weapon that they can use to dominate. So, it's certainly not limited to poor countries. But I think as a final word, there's so many. This whole mindset needs to change. And where I work, where I come from, where we are trying to deal with religious so-called justifications for violence. I mean, we had a client who was beaten up by the husband, kept going to the Sharia court to ask for divorce. The Sharia court just refused to take her seriously. She made 49 police reports, and they still would not take her seriously until her brother got beaten up by her husband. Suddenly they were like, oh my God, because the brother is not in the marriage. And suddenly they all got excited. Only after that she got her interim protection order, and then it all worked. So despite our laws, that whole mindset is still there. And yet these are people who keep saying, we follow the way of the Prophet and all that. And one of the things that we're trying to say is this: the Prophet never, ever beat his wives, ever. So what are you saying when you say you want to follow the Prophet?
Thank you very much. I think that's a brilliant ending. And perhaps just on a very short note, I would like to perhaps, those of you who are on social media platform, Facebook, Twitter, you can actually tag One Singapore, Marina, Trina, Azra, myself, to actually, share just a little bit about the event tonight. Like sometimes we ask ourselves, what can we do? And you would think of all the big things, but it is just perhaps that 140 characters tweet, that could actually empower another woman. So these are like very simple things, and it's available on our fingertips. And so please be empowered to actually share this with your circle of influence. And last and not least, I'd like to end with a quote by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and he actually said, "Men must teach each other that real men do not violate or oppress women, and that a woman's place is not just in the home or the field, but in schools and offices and boardroom." And I think that will conclude very much like what some of us have actually uttered tonight. So I'd like to actually pass a gift to thank our speakers, and maybe shall we give them first a round of applause?
Interested in issues of violence against women, do follow Pixel Project at Pixel Project, because it's a wonderful social media project to raise awareness of violence against women. It's almost like 24 hours tweeting up news about violence against women, but also giving resources for where you can get help in all over the world.
Okay, let's call Miss Trina Liang. And last but not least, Marina. Can you do one more? Okay, so for those of you who have a bit more time, we have some light refreshments.